Hello, and thank you for joining us for the TAA webinar, Draw Your Readers In, How-Tos of Digital Textbook Illustration, presented by Paul Krieger. Paul is an award-winning teacher and the creator, author, and illustrator of Morton Publishing's Visual Analogy Guide series. Due to the success of his first book on human anatomy in 2004, this unique book concept quickly evolved into a 4-book series. He is Professor Emeritus of Anatomy and Physiology at Grand Rapids Community College and also works as a scientific illustrator. Hello, Paul. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Kim. I appreciate the introduction, and it's really wonderful to be here today. So I would like to begin by giving everyone a greetings from Grand Rapids, Michigan. I think it's always nice to know where your presenter is coming from. That's actually a photo that I took. That's the view of my backyard from my home office where I do my authoring and illustrating. And it's a beautiful, crisp fall day here in Grand Rapids, and I hope you have beautiful weather wherever you're attending from today. So let me begin with my outline. So to stay true to what I said I was going to present about, part 1 will be on how digital illustrations are created. That'll be the first portion. The second portion is how to evaluate an effective book cover. Part 3 will be how to start your own digital sketchbook if you're interested in doing so. And then part 4 will be the Q&A, and as Kim mentioned, you'll be typing your questions to her, and then she will be reading those to me, and I'll answer them at the end. So let's get started. The first thing I wanted to do is give you a context of what I do as an author and an illustrator. So as Kim already mentioned, I kind of wear 2 hats as both the author and illustrator of this Visual Analogy Guide series. And those are covers of my 4 books. So I have 4 books in the series. The first one that I made was on anatomy. Second one was on physiology. The third was on a combined human anatomy and physiology. And the last one is chemistry. So these are core concept books that are really big on activities. So they have coloring activities, fill in the blanks, analogies, lots of different interactive tools for students to succeed in their courses. So that kind of gives you a flavor for the type of books that I'm working on. So to give you a little more understanding, I opened up and took a photo of here's a 2-page spread in my book. So if you look at the header, the module name's at the top, and this one's on anatomy. So it says, oh, we're in the respiratory system, and that 2-page spread covers the tracheobronchial tree. So structures inside your lungs. So notice that on the text page on the left, we have a description, mostly in table form, of the anatomy of this tracheobronchial tree. Then over on the right-hand side, we have an illustration. This is an illustration that I made digitally, and I'll talk more about that later. Notice for right now, for future reference, that it's a black and white illustration. My book is a 2-color book, as you can see from this 2-page spread. Notice there's a key to the illustration at the bottom, which is given right here, as I showed in that green rectangle. And that allows students to cross-reference within the module so they don't have to look up answers at the back of the book. I have coloring activities that I show with a crayon icon, and then I have coloring instructions, or a short little bit of instructions inside that box. Notice there's fill in the blanks. That's what I was saying, lots of little active learning things. And notice in this case that the illustration is graphically organized in a diagonal pathway. And that's intentional because I'm allowing the student to observe these structures from macroscopic down to microscopic. And then also notice that I've intentionally left some white space at the top. And this is because in this printed form, I want students to scribble in, take notes, and make the book feel like their own. More like an activity book. Okay, so that gives you a feel for what my books are like. Now, having said that, let's go right into part one, how digital illustrations are created. So the first thing you need to know is about the tools of the trade. So what are the tools I need to do digital illustrations in my home office that I'm doing right now? Well, the first thing you need is a good computer. It has to have a lot of RAM, and it has to have a good graphics card and a fast processor. I use a laptop, but you could also use a desktop. The software set that I use is mostly dictated by what my publisher wants, but as most people in my position would do, they go to the Adobe Creative Cloud. That's now a subscription service where you pay a monthly fee. And I have Illustrator in parentheses. Adobe Illustrator is the main program that I use, and I'll show you how I create an illustration in it later. So another thing you need is a drawing tablet. Think of this as your digital drawing pad. So instead of a sketchbook, you have a drawing tablet. You also need a digital pencil, which also serves as your pen or paintbrush, depending on what medium you're working with. In addition to that, you need a large, high-resolution external monitor. And you need the digital storage system because you don't want to lose any of your work. So you can use the cloud as I do, or you can use an external hard disk. I happen to use both because everybody's terrified of losing documents and losing work that they've created. So let me show you how to visualize this. This is a photo of my home office. So we'll start here. I'll get the laser pointer in the PowerPoint, and you can see that I have this LG external monitor. It's high definition, 4K, it's 27 inches. A lot of illustrators, so that's right here where you see this picture of the heart, illustration of the heart on the screen. Some illustrators use two monitors, dual ones. Sometimes they use ones much larger than this. I would say for my purposes, this would be like the bare minimum that you could get by on. Then if you notice over here, if we jump to the right-hand side, I have a 16-inch MacBook Pro laptop. You can see that closed right here. And then here's the digital pen for the tablet, and that's shown right here, sitting in a holder. Then this right over here is my drawing tablet. That's like my digital sketch pad. The company that I get this one from is a Japanese company called Wacom. And the name of my particular model of tablet is called an Intuos tablet. This is not the latest one. This is not the best one. This is kind of a middle of the road one. And they have different sizes. So I'm showing you that this is the medium size. Then if we go over here to the right-hand side, I use a Logitech Marathon mouse. And I'm specifically telling you the exact type because I have used other Logitech mice with my MacBook Pro, and this actually works the best. So after some experimentation, that proved to be the best. So that's if you were sitting at my seat, that's what you would see, and that's my equipment that I use. Okay, so you need to understand about a tablet. So when you're drawing on a tablet like this, you're using that digital pen, as you see right over here, just like you would a pencil on a sketch pad. And you notice the person's fingers are on here. This is a touch sensitive surface. So they can actually resize things and do things with their fingers or with the pen. And then if you look over here, the important thing to understand is that as the illustrator is sitting at her table, notice that she's drawing here, has the pen in her hand, but also her eyes are on what? The monitor, because whatever she draws is not going to show up here, but is going to be shown on the screen. So I'm kind of emphasizing her eyes are on the monitor. That's exactly how I work. So now you know my tools of the trade. Now you know exactly how I work. And I'm going to throw one little fun fact in. So there's my mouse, right? So for my first book, I didn't know much about tablets, and I didn't know that they were essential for creating digital art. So I found a shortcut. You could actually use an optical mouse like a pencil, and I did that. And I used it to create over 100 illustrations. And here's the really weird thing. I'm a lefty, I'm left-handed, so when I draw with a pencil, I always use my left hand. Oddly enough, When I use a mouse, I always use my right hand. So believe it or not, all my illustrations for my first book were created using my right hand. So there's a little weird fun fact, kind of strange, but true. So moving on, there's a little bit of background information you may need if you're not very familiar with digital art and digital software. The first thing you need to know is all graphic programs are not designed the same. So they fall into two big categories, and one is called raster based and the other one is called vector based. And I'm going to show you both today, so you need to know the difference. So what's raster based? Well, raster based is any digital art software program that uses pixels to create art. So pixels, the downside to them is they don't always have the best resolution, as you can see in this versus right over here, the VS. So pixels gives you a limitation for your resolution. An example is the Procreate app that I'm going to show you a short video on later in the presentation. Anytime you use a raster-based program to create art, it's going to end in the tag JPEG, TIFF, or GIF. Well, we've all heard a lot of those, so you know this is a really common program. Adobe Photoshop is also a raster-based program. The only downside to these is they're not scalable. What does that mean? It means that if you create the art as a small size, you need to print it in that same size or the resolution will be lost and it might end up looking something like this at the top. It might look grainy or pixelated. So scalable means that you could change the size of it. You could reduce it, you could enhance it, and it's not going to lose resolution. Sadly, raster-based are not scalable, and the main purpose people use these for are photo editing. So let's contrast that with a vector-based program. So a vector-based program uses something called paths, not pixels. These are mathematically determined, and they give you nice smooth lines like you see in the VS versus at the top here. An example of that one is how I create all my illustrations for my publisher, and that's in the program Adobe Illustrator. The tag on illustrations created in a vector-based program are AI for Adobe Illustrator, or PDFs, or EPS. EPSs are the file types that you need to use if you're going to go to print. It's short for encapsulated postscript. So when I send my illustrations to my publisher, I send them to my publisher as EPS files because I know that's what the printer's going to need. What's the wonderful thing about these things? They're scalable. So no matter what size I create the original illustration in, I can shrink it, expand it, I can make it 10 times bigger, I could put it on the side of the building and it wouldn't lose any resolution. So this is great for printing and illustrating. So now you know the difference between those two. Now, another bit of background information you need to know is that digital illustrations are created in layers. So each layer is superimposed on the other. So when you create digital art, you actually need to think in layers. The best analogy I could come up with is, think of those old-time overhead projectors where you had a transparency, right? Well, imagine you had a transparency, but then imagine you wanted to add something. So you put another transparency over that transparency and right on that. And you put another layer and another layer. And each layer has some different markings on it. Well, if you think of it that way, you're really stacking layers on top of each other that are all rather transparent. Then that is a good way to think of how drawing programs work or digital illustration programs work. So your first layer, for example, might be the background. A lot of times that's just all white, or the default is white, which is why I put that there. It's a default. Layer two might be your line work. So for me, remember that tracheobronchial tree I showed you? I'm doing black lines, so I'm creating all the line work for that. That would be my second layer. Now, I need a fill color where I want to do shading. So a fill color refers to anywhere you block in color. It could be anything on the grayscale. It could be any color of any kind. So that might be another separate layer. A fourth layer might be the leader lines that I'm going to use to point to different structures in that tracheobronchial tree. A fifth layer might be the numbers or labels associated with those leader lines. So by having 5 different layers, what it really allows me to do is to have control over each one of those layers. I can group everything together and lock it in that layer, and then digitally, I can actually make that appear or disappear. So you have to think in layers when you do digital art. Okay, so now you know the prerequisites, and now we're going to move into my 3-step process for creating digital illustration. So this gives you an insight into how I work. What's step 1? I have to do my research. Step 2, create a sketch. Step 3, create the digital art totally digitally. So here we go. So the first thing is research. So no illustrator wants to totally copy another illustrated illustration. That's no good. That's not the right approach. You always want to create your own art. So as you look at this, for me, I'm in this area of anatomy and physiology. So I would look at anatomical models would be one part of my research. I was fortunate enough at my school to have a really good cadaver lab. So I also look at cadavers. I also have a personal library with a lot of really good resource material that I can use as references. I also use online images. So here's like something I recently did, and I'm giving you an example. So I'm showing you the last bullet, online images. Here's 11 different online images, and it's all of the same thing. These are different online images of a bone inside your skull called the ethmoid bone, and you're looking at it from the top. You're just seeing one little piece of it from the top. So notice I got 1, 2, 3, 4 in the first row, 5 through 9 in the second row, and then 11 different images. As I do my research on these, I have to know my anatomy because I have to know what they really look like, and I often want to go back to cadavers to find that. And notice that I have a pink circle around number 4, number 6, and number 11. After looking at all these 11 different images, I've decided that 4, 6, and 11 are the most anatomically accurate, the most real, and the ones I want to model my sketch after. So after doing my research on anatomy and on images, then I'm going to go make my sketch. Now for me, that means making a pencil sketch, but that's just my way of doing it. So here's my pencil sketch that after doing my research, I came up with. And in anatomy, we would call this the superior portion, meaning that the top, like an aerial view, looking down on top of it, of the ethmoid bone in the skull. So as you look at this, I have my pencil sketch. But you don't have to do a pencil sketch. I could have done this pencil sketch digitally, but I just prefer, it's my personal preference, to do it with traditional media. Then what I do is after I get this sketch completed, I take a photo of the sketch with my iPad's camera. After I do that, I import it into Adobe Illustrator. I import it right into the program. Then I'll lock it in its own layer. I'll put another layer on top of it, and I'll trace over it in a new layer. And then I'll start my digital work and create a lot of more new lines that you don't see here. So after I did that and completed my sketch, here's step 3, create it digitally. When I'm all completed with that illustration, it looks like this. So there's my digital art. That's 100% digital, done with a pencil and a tablet and a computer, as I explained earlier. So now I have a video, and this video is going to show you, imagine you were going into Illustrator, you were looking at the program on the screen. Now I'm going to show you how that actually works. So I'm going to just do a narration over this as it works. So, okay. So here we go. Let me get started with the video. I went over to the toolbar on the left-hand side, and I grabbed the circle tool or ellipse tool, and now you can see I have this elongated ellipse. I can change the color really quickly in the color panel down at the bottom, so you're seeing the colors change to different colors right now. Look at how quickly you can do that just with that little eyedropper tool. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the grayscale, and now I have a gray ellipse, but I'm going to go back, I'm going to delete that one, and I'm going to create a new one. and this new one's this nice circle. So instead of having an ellipse, I have a circle. With the click of a button, I can change that to a gradient. So instead of having to shade that all in by hand, look at how quick it was to create a sphere. So now I don't have a circle, but I have a three-dimensional sphere. Now I just want to show you the tricks you have in digital art. I'm going to copy that sphere real quickly and make a copy of it. And I've decided I want to make a necklace of these, like a strand of pearls. And look at how quickly, with copies of that original, I can string all these together. Now I got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those. Now I'm going to copy the whole group that I just selected, and I'm going to cut and paste that, and then I'm going to rotate that group. I'm going to pull it up here, and voila, I suddenly have what looks like a chain of pearls. I can grab that, move it around, and remember, it's scalable because this is Adobe Illustrator. I can make it as big or as small as I wanted to, and it wouldn't lose resolution. Okay, that was just showing you the benefit of digital art. You can do a lot of things quickly that would take a lot longer with traditional media. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what it looks like to draw inside of that program. So I grabbed the pencil tool, and I decided I'm going to draw a tree branch from memory. So remember, we make paths. Can you see those little dots? That's called a path in Illustrator. And it's kind of like connect the dots. So I have a path that's mathematically determined, and there's my pathway. Now I'm drawing little sub branches coming off that main branch. And so now I have the outline of tree branches, right? Now what I'm going to do is add some more detail. So I want to show some of the bark texture. So I'm gradually adding that in. And I zoomed in right there because you can zoom in, reposition my art on the screen. And now what I'm going to do is I decided those lines are too thin. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to change what's called the stroke. So that's the thickness of that line. I can make it any thickness I want to. Notice I'm thickening all these strokes or all these paths or lines that I created that represent the tree branch that we're drawing. So there we go. I'm increasing the size. So I said, okay, that's pretty good. Now I'm going to change a few of these, and you can go crazy with playing around with this for a long time. So I intentionally didn't put too much detail on this so the video wasn't too long, but I'm going to show you how I would add some dimensionality to this now. So I'm doing like a little scribbly line, a controlled scribbly line. And that controlled scribble is making that branch look a little bit more 3D, okay? Now, each one of those little scribbles is its own path that I can also change the thickness of the line. I can warp it, twist it, move it around. And so all these are little elements that you can manipulate. Once you draw them, that's not the end. It's really just the beginning, and you can make all kind of changes. So now I'm adding little details to give the bark a little more texture. And now I can't help but resist to go back and add little details because I'm a detail person and I love all the little details. And so this will continue for a little while, and then I'm going to demonstrate how you fill in a color. So right now we're just looking at all the lines, which will all be in one layer. And so this is all line work just in a single layer. So now I'm putting a little bit more to make it more 3D, a little more scribble here, a little more scribble there. And pretty soon I will consciously stop myself and say, oh, okay, Paul, we can't make this video an hour, so let's stop. That'll happen pretty soon. And so now that happened, and I'm going over here, and I'm gonna select that whole thing, and I'm gonna group it together. So I'm gonna go into the menu at the top, and I'm gonna find group, and I'm going to group it together as one object, and now I can move it around. So watch me move it around. I'm grabbing it and dragging it all over the page. But now I want to fill in that. I want to fill it in as a color. I don't want to just have the line work. So what I'm going to do now is go to a separate layer. And in that separate layer, I'm going to draw an outline of the area I want to fill in with color. So I basically trace around the outline of the tree branch, but I have to trace around the entire thing. This has to be a closed loop. So it's going to come to the very end, and boom, right there, I end with what I started with. So now I can fill that in any color. Watch me do it. Boom. It's all gray, but the gray's on top. So I got to rearrange the layers, put one layer below the other one. Ooh, now did you notice the gray went to the background behind my lines? So notice that my fill is not perfect. It's not right on the lines. So I'm going to have to go back and make it match up with my line work. Oh, now you just saw another change. I hit the gradient tool, and now it looks darker on the right and lighter on the left. So that added a little bit of interest. Now I'm going to go in, and in that fill layer, I'm going to move these little dots around. So these are little points on my filling color. Now, this is what true artists hate about this program. When you're doing this, it's like applied geometry. You're dealing with arcs and curves, and you have to think like an engineer. And true artists hate Illustrator for that very reason, and they prefer other programs. So see how I'm warping that now and pushing that arc out, and then they pull it back. So yeah, you definitely have to think like an engineer almost when you're working in this program. And it's like anything, you get used to it after a while, but it's a pretty big learning curve when you first start. And I'm not a master by any means. There's still tons of things I have to learn in Photoshop and Illustrator, and they can do just amazing things, those two programs. So now I'm coming to the end of my video in a very short time. So in about 5 or 6 minutes, I created an okay looking tree branch, not photorealistic, but you get the idea, right? So there we go. And that's good. We'll stop it right there. So that gives you an idea of what it's like for me as an artist working inside of Illustrator. So I think that gives you a little flavor for what it's like. Okay, so now we're on to part 2. And part 2 is how to evaluate an effective book cover. In the early editions of my books, they hired a professional book cover designer, but I wasn't happy with some of the book cover designs, so I actually persuaded them to let me help with that role, and now I design some of my own book covers. So I want to convince you that good book covers are really important. So first of all, they're an advertisement for your book. Hopefully, they make a positive first impression with your readers. That's your goal. They inform your readers what your book is about visually. And good book covers, as we know, can improve sales. They should also follow good graphic design principles. And that's what I want to talk about in a little bit more detail. So if you look at this, I just want to do a little demonstration. Let's go way back when, 1974. Peter Benchley wrote the novel Jaws, and Jaws is coming out, and they're having a sales meeting and they're figuring out how to do the art for the cover. Now imagine that you had no art on the cover of that book and it just said Jaws. Does the reader or potential possible reader even know what the book is about? I mean, let's be honest. It could be about dentistry, right? We really don't know what the title is without an illustration. So my point here is the illustrator in me is trying to convince all the authors out there, sometimes words are not enough. Realize that illustrations are vitally important. So here was the first iteration of the cover. And now you're seeing the jaws of a shark. And that jaws of a shark is going around a little seaside town. So now that delivers a couple key pieces of information. Number one, we know it has something to do with sharks, this novel. And it's engulfing a seaside town. Maybe there are shark attacks. So now we know a little bit more. Now, this is kind of a sophisticated, a nice suave cover that you might kind of expect to see on the cover of the New Yorker magazine or something like that. It's not horrifying. It's not terrifying. It's not shocking like this one is. Now, we all know that that last final cover, they decided to go with this one because when people saw it, unlike the initial cover, it kind of induces a feeling of dread when we see those terrifying teeth on the head of the shark, and we see the swimmer there, and the shark is rising out from the depths with its black coal eyes and its jagged teeth. This delivers an emotional, visceral response. We can imagine what it will be like if we're that swimmer. Also, we have a sense of scale. Look at the size of the shark compared to the person. Also, there's a sense of mystery. Notice that the whole entire shark body is not shown. So we're thinking, well, how big is this thing? Because we're only seeing the head. Bottom line, you need a good cover. And we know how this cover is burned in the brains of everyone because they also use it as a movie poster. So I hope I've convinced you good covers are important. All right. So here's 4 principles of graphic design that apply to good book covers. And you can use the acronym CRACK to remember it. So first is C for contrast. Contrast helps you focus attention on important items. R for repetition. It ties objects or images together. It unifies things. Alignment organizes the page to make it easier on the eye, and proximity creates relationships between objects. So to demonstrate these principles, I'm going to use this book cover. So this is a book cover that I designed, and it's using a lot of the principles we just talked about. But to really understand it, what I want to do is compare it to one of my old book covers. So here was the book cover for the 2nd edition of my book, which they actually hired a professional book cover designer to make. And then here's the new cover for the 5th edition. So I'm going to go through this with you and point out a few things. So I'm going to grab the laser pointer here. So let's start with the old cover for my 2nd edition on the left. So we'll look at C, contrast. What do you mean contrast? Well, we could have contrast in many things: color, size, shape. So do we have any good contrast in this old cover? Yeah, there's contrast in color. There's the purple background with the magenta colored band right over here. So there's good contrast there. Also, the white color of this font versus the other color of the word anatomy. So there's good contrast there. Also, we have contrast in size of fonts. So the word anatomy is larger than a visual analogy guide to human. Then we go over to the cover on the right side. Is there good contrast here? Well, there's a pale blue background and there's a bright red text. So yeah, that's contrast in color. There's also contrast in text size. If we look over here, the first part is smaller than the words human anatomy. So that's good. So we got good contrast in both of those, okay? So the second thing is repetition. That's a repeating element that kind of gives a signal that things go together. So if I look at this cover, this old cover on the left, I don't really see any repeating elements. I see a lot of disorganized images on this the cover, which is not good. You never want disorganized on your cover. So I go over here on this side. Notice that, see this blue ellipse shape? The blue ellipse shape is behind the peace sign. It's behind this parachute, and it's behind the kangaroo. Why do I have that? Well, a repeated object like this unifies things. Why do I want to unify all these 3 things? They're analogies. That's the title of the book. They're the analogies that I use to create things. So as I look at that, I have a nice repeating element. A is for alignment, okay? If I look at my old cover, I have an align right with the text over here and align right over here. That's about the only alignment that I see. If I look at the new cover, I have alignment with text here. If I draw an imaginary line between the Y and the R in my name at the bottom, those line up. I also have an alignment here with that box and this. So I do have good alignment, so that's good. That organizes things nicely, okay? So we have C, R, A, and then A for alignment, and then P for proximity. Proximity should show relationships between things. So In here on the new cover, notice that I have all my marking pens, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, except for this one, are all grouped together. And so instead of being disorganized on the page, they're all grouped together, and odd numbers look better than even, so that's why we have 5 instead of 4. So that's good. Okay, so these are proximity. Oh, they're all colored markers. They're all for the same purpose, so that's why we put them together. There's also a mistake in proximity, okay? So let me show you what that is. Notice the word 5th edition here is tied in with the title, and my name is down at the bottom. If I go over here on the old cover, notice that 2nd edition is under my name. These things are in proximity to each other. What's that implying? There's a relationship there. But unless this is the 2nd iteration of me, like I've been reincarnated or something, then that shouldn't be here. Where should it be? It should be down here, over here. So this is actually a mistake on the 2nd cover. It would be much more effective to have this down here, and then my name should have just been left alone at the top. Notice 5th edition over here is with the title, so that's much better. So if you follow those simple rules, you can evaluate your next textbook cover and see if it's good or bad. Now, I wanted to show you that this is the new cover that's coming out on my next book in January that I just completed looking at the proof pages for. So notice that I'm following a theme. So this is my anatomy book, 5th edition on the left. My anatomy and physiology book, they're following the same theme. They both have light blue backgrounds. They're both actively showing coloring activities. So remember we said a good book cover is an advertisement for your book. So knowing what I just told you about my books, isn't this a good advertisement? And isn't it much better than that 2nd edition cover that I showed you before? So I'm really glad that my publisher was open-minded enough to let me help with the book cover designs. Okay, so now this is my segue to go into the last part of the presentation. So basically I'm asking you the question, as an author, have you ever done this? You have an idea and you sketch it out on a napkin. You might have a Sharpie pen or something else, and you scribble this idea out. Oh, you have an idea for some person over here and something else over here and a graph over here. And then you send this to your editor and they send it to the artist, and the artist gets it and says, what in the world do they want? Oh my gosh, I have no clue. So what you want to do is, so I said, you can do better. So this is where we get into the sketch pad. As the last part. So part 3 is how to start an easy digital sketchbook. So here's what you'll need. What you will need is, number 1, a tablet. So I use an iPad. You could use another tablet. You'll need software, and the app is actually Procreate, and it's only for $10, and that's much cheaper than if you have to buy anything with the Adobe Creative Suite, but it's an amazingly powerful tool, as I'll show you in a minute. You also need an Apple Pencil. That's your digital pencil, pen, paintbrush. So with those 3 things, you can have a nice sketchbook. So how would authors use Procreate? So here's what you do. You can sketch an idea for a new illustration. Rather than on a napkin, you can do it in this Procreate app. You can also import a photo or chart or a graph, and then after marking it up, you can email it to your editor. So you might, as I said, take a separate photo of something, mark that up with comments, and add your own little comments and send it to your editor. You can also keep a nice organized record of your new ideas and have them all in one place and not have to find them in a file folder somewhere. So I just want to show you what I use. I'm not pushing this particular case in any way, but I chose this case. It's called Finty Slim Shell Case because it has a pencil holder in it, and you don't want to lose your Apple Pencil. So this is only $16. You can find it on Amazon. And notice with the yellow arrow down here, there's the place where you can store your Apple Pencil, and that's really handy and nice. I use an Apple iPad 7th generation. That's not the latest and greatest. I think they're like in their 9th generation now. And then I have an Apple Pencil 1st generation. Again, I'm only telling you what I use. They have a 2nd generation Apple Pencil, which is for their iPad Pro, which is more expensive, but I don't do that. Okay, so here's the way it works. If you've never seen an Apple Pencil before, I really love this tool because it's the closest thing I've ever had to the feel of a real pencil. And it has a cap on the end of it, and the cap, as the yellow arrow shows, can move on and off. This is the charger right here, and so what you do is you pop the cap off, you plug it into the charging port on your iPad, and in 15 to 30 minutes, it's charged. You put the cap on, and you start drawing on your screen. So first step is to purchase the app. You go to the app store, and Procreate has an icon that looks like this. And then what you do is you begin sketching. So I just thought I would show you, I have a short video, again, to show you, here's what Procreate looks like. This is called the gallery. It shows all the different art that you have there. And so I'm going to just show you how to do a quick sketch and email it to your editor. So here we go. So what I have to do first is go to the upper right-hand corner, choose my screen. I chose 4x6 photo, boom, click on it. There's my canvas. Now what I'm going to do is go to the top, grab a brush. I chose inking, technical pen. Now I've already chosen a purple color. You can't see that, it's in the upper right-hand corner, and I just start writing on the surface. So this is me writing with my Apple Pencil. This is fun. And I want to draw a circle after this, so I'm going to draw a little circle, as you'll see in a second. But let's say I don't get it exactly right. If I hold my Apple Pencil down, Procreate will automatically change it into an ellipse or a nice circle. So you can see at the top, they give me choice, ellipse or circle. I'm going to click on circle, boom, I have a perfect circle. Isn't that handy? Now, just for the sake of brevity, I made a quick happy face instead of a detailed illustration. And then I guess I was in a holiday mood, so I'm drawing kind of a little Christmas tree over at the side, and I'll put a few ornaments on it, and then I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to call it good. And that is what I want to send my editor. So I'm now going to go to the share tool at the top. I'm going to save it as a JPEG document. And boom, I go to my editor, and now I'm ready to mail it off. And it would be sent off as a piece of a JPEG file, just like that, and we're done. So that's just a quick, super quick way to show you Procreate. There's many, many YouTube videos on all the details of Procreate, and we don't have the time today to go into the details of all that. Okay, so you can also, in Procreate, use this as a tool to create really nice art. So I've already done this, a digital sketchbook, so I'm going to show you what I did. So boom, this is a time-lapse video of a rose-breasted grosbeak sketch that I did totally with my Apple Pencil and Procreate. Now you might say, how did you make that time-lapse video? Here's a beautiful thing. I didn't have to do anything to make that time-lapse video. Anytime you draw in Procreate, they automatically create that for you. How beautiful is that? So we're going to go to another one. So here's another one. This is a time-lapse video of a chestnut mandibled toucan sketch that I did. This is from a photo that I took of this actual bird in Costa Rica when I stayed at an eco lodge called Lapa Rios some years ago. And boom, there's that. Okay, and then let's see here. Whoop, I'm going to go to a new one. And then here's another time-lapse video of a heliconia plant, a tropical plant. This is also from Costa Rica. And first I do this, first I put in the background, then I do the sketch, then I add the color, and this one had 4 layers. Okay. And now I'll go to another one to show you. This is a time-lapse video of another plant, botanical plant specimen. And if I look over here, I create the background, I do the pencil sketch. This is an 8 layers total. And then I add the color at the end and boom. So in a $10 art program, you can do some really beautiful art like this. So isn't that nice? All right. So now we're coming to the end of our presentation. And so I wanted to basically just leave you with one thought. images really, as we all know, we can search Google Images and we find all these beautiful images really fast, and it has cheapened the process of what illustrators have to go through to create them. So my final takeaway message is the next time you search Google Images, remember that it took a good illustrator many hours of hard work to create that beautiful image. So remember to respect the work. And that means things like honoring copyright, etc. So with that final message, I'd just like to say thanks for your attention. And I really appreciate everyone taking some time out of your day to come today. And if you have questions, you can type those over to Kim. And again, my name is Paul Krieger. There's my email address, paulkriegerstudio@gmail.com. And then I of social media, but I am on LinkedIn. So if you want to, feel free to go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Again, if you have a question for Paul, you can type it into the question box on the control panel on your screen, and then I will read it to Paul during this Q&A. So the first question is, can you discuss some non-Apple options? This person has a Wacom tablet and wants to learn how to use it with a PC. And she also has Corel Creative, not Adobe. Any suggestions?
Right. So that's a good question. Yeah, I only talked about Apple because that's what I use. If you go to like schools of illustration and things like that, Apple's often the preferred method to use. But having said that, all of the things that I showed you today can be done in the PC format. So you don't have to, you can use Windows, you don't have to use Apple at all. And anything that I showed you today can be done in the other platform. So you absolutely don't have to use Apple. And really it's all the difficult part of any of this is just learning the tools. And, if you go into places like LinkedIn Learning has really great videos on how to do this, but you can also go to YouTube and find tons of different videos of how to use your Wacom tablet, how to use Illustrator. And, it's a big learning curve at first, but like anything, once you get used to it, you become more comfortable with it, and then it becomes a time saver. So the short answer to that question is yes, you can use it in Apple platform, Windows platform, either one is fine.
All right, thank you. And then the next question is, why can't you just use your iPad to draw on and transfer to your MacBook computer?
Say that one more time.
Sure. Why can't you just use your iPad to draw on and then transfer that to your MacBook computer?
When you draw on your iPad, you have to have some software that's behind it. So, if I just touch my screen, it's not going to make a mark or anything. I need some software behind it. So I mentioned Procreate, and Procreate's one art application, but there are many others too. I actually have several others. I like that one because it has a lot of bang for the buck. But actually, even in built-in PDF files and things like that, they have markup features that you could use with your Apple Pencil. So touching the screen wouldn't be enough because you need a built-in software that recognizes markers and things like that to respond to. So yeah, you always have to have some type of art program. It doesn't have to be Procreate, but it has to be something. And then after you do that, you can definitely store it to your laptop or your computer.
All right. Well, I am not seeing any other questions. So it seems like you answered everyone's questions that they came into the webinar with today. Thank you, Paul, so much for sharing your expertise with us.